Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. This is a celebratory event, so I want to get some good energy in this room for the Hills because they bring such beautiful energy wherever they go, and I want to reciprocate that. My name is Amber Nicosia. I am the president on the board of directors here at Penn South. We are here today to celebrate the publication of Climbing the Rough Side of the Mountain, the extraordinary story of love, civil rights, and labor activism written by our neighbors, longtime Penn South residents, dear friends, Norman and Velma Hill. The Hills have been lifelong activists in the civil rights and labor movements, and the only couple to hold leadership positions in these movements. It's a beautiful, beautiful story that you bring tonight. A little bit about this memoir. The Honorable John Lewis wrote, "This book is Norman and Velma's shared story of their relentless struggle, fighting with their minds, bodies, spirits, and love to make America realize the best of itself. And in devoting their lives to this work, they help this nation move significantly closer to being a true democracy." Thank you. You can clap for that. We need more of that in our world. Our first speaker tonight will be Brendan Griffith, Chief of Staff of the New York City Central Labor Council. The council represents 1.3 million members in New York. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Amber, and thank you so much, Velma and Norman, for all the work that you've done. As was said, my name is Brendan Griffith. I'm the Chief of Staff at the New York City Central Labor Council. And the first thing I want to say is offer the regrets of our President, Vinny Alvarez, and our Secretary Treasurer, Janella Hines, that they couldn't attend tonight. They wanted us to say on their behalf how grateful they are for all of your work. As I thought about my remarks this evening, one of the more important things I realized that the labor movement and the civil rights movement accomplishes and needs to do on a regular basis is remind people in power of humanity, of the stories of real people and the struggles that they face. And that is something that this book does. While many know the tremendous accomplishments of Norman and Velma Hill, from the integration of Rainbow Beach, from the organization of paraprofessionals within the United Federation of Teachers, from all the amazing work at the A. Philip Randolph Institute, to know the how, the challenges, the struggles, the sacrifices, that, and if you look at the book and the dedications, all goes back to one theme, which I'm just going to reiterate again, is that this is a roadmap for the next generation of leaders. And while so much has been accomplished, there is so much yet to accomplish. And to share your story, as we all know in the work of the civil rights movement, the labor movement, takes bravery. It takes bravery. And so, my remarks are simple, and they will end with an expression of gratitude to Velma and to Norman for sharing your story with the rest of us, for paving the way for the next generation, and for all that you've accomplished and all that will be accomplished because of the path that you have set. So on behalf of the New York City Central Labor Council, the New York City Labor Movement, thank you so much, not just for the work that you have done, but for the story that you are sharing right now. And congratulations on such a wonderful book. Thank you.
Among her many accomplishments, Velma was the founder of the UFT Paraprofessionals, which you can read more about that story in the book, which is being sold here today in the back. We are honored to have with us this evening Leroy Barr, Secretary and Staff Director of the United Federation of Teachers. Thank you. Please, will you come up and say a few words?
Good evening, everyone. You know, first of all, it's my absolute honor and privilege to be here tonight to represent a legacy that, specifically Norma, that Velma left for us at UFT, and all that they as a couple have accomplished with respect to the labor movement, with respect to all that they put out on behalf of civil rights. That symbiotic relationship that goes back for decades between this couple is really a symbiotic relationship between labor and civil rights. There is no separation between those two. I mean, I think about the fact that Dr. King was in Memphis for the sanitation strike and all the other, battles that we fought to get to this point. But I am particularly proud of the work, and I'll speak about Velma Hill first, the work that she did to help to establish the paraprofessional chapter at the UFT. We are a membership that's 200,000 strong currently. And of that 200,000 currently, there's about 28,000 paraprofessionals. And that, quite frankly, in large part is due to the vision, due to the hard work, due to the tenacity of Velma Hill and her team back then. They laid the foundation so that we could actually have the platform to represent paraprofessionals throughout this entire city at this point. They brought something special into the classroom. They brought the community into the classroom. They brought a connection to the neighborhoods in a way that probably up until that point we really didn't have. And it was a fight for those of you who were around during that time. It was a fight, but that connection is something that you laid the foundation for. And I gotta tell you, there are millions of children, myself included, that benefited from the work that you did back then. And I personally want to thank you for all of that that you gave of yourself to bring into the classroom that love and attention that children needed. Our debt can never be paid. With respect to Norman Hill, listen, A. Philip Randolph, Core, I can go on and on about the accomplishments that he has had over the years. And again, we owe a debt of gratitude to him as well. But what I should have started with is that I believe in love. I believe in love in a time in this world where we need just a little more love. We need just a little bit more understanding. We need a little bit more commitment to each other. And it's something to be committed to anything for 60 years. It's a beautiful thing to be committed to each other for 60 years. So not only am I here to celebrate the powerful impact that I personally know that Velma Hill has had on the paraprofessionals and the United Federation of Teachers on a whole, the powerful impact that Norman Hill has had on the civil rights movement in terms of all that he's been involved in over the years and the imprint and the cornerstones that he's left in every organization that he's been in. I'm here to celebrate the combined power, the combined strength, the combined love that they brought to the movement over 6 decades. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Norman Hill. She comes in, we'll skip around. Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Hill, as I knew him growing up, having had the honor of living in the same building, was the National Program Director of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, under Jim Farmer, and staff coordinator for the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He served as the president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute from 1980 to 2004, the longest tenure in the organization's history. Mr. Hill, will you share a few words with us this evening?
Thank you. My wife, Velma, my love, comrade, friend, and partner, and I have written a memoir entitled Climbing the Rough Side of the Mountain, an extraordinary story of life, love, civil rights, and labor activism, with an introduction co-authored by the late, great civil rights icon and congressional leader John Lewis, and Vernon Jordan, former president of the National Urban League, director of the Vote Education Project of the Southern Regional Council, and leader of the United Negro College Fund. The memoir chronicles our experiences and activities that enabled us to be the only black couple to hold leadership positions in both the trade union and civil rights movements. I share with you some of the highlights of the book. The memoir discusses the August 28, 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. A. Philip Randolph, the chair and initiator of the march, appointed a 4-person planning committee for the march. Bide Rustin, deputy director and chief organizer. Tom Kahn, executive director of the League for Industrial Democracy. Velma and myself. We deliberated and presented to A. Philip Randolph a 2-part program. The first day was to be made up of sit-ins, of civil rights activists in congressional offices, of elected leaders who were opposed to or reluctant to support civil rights legislation. The second day was to be a gigantic march on the nation's capital. A. Philip Randolph convened a meeting of 5 other civil rights leaders. They agreed there ought to be a march. But unlike Randolph's original call for a march for jobs, they said the march ought to be about jobs and freedom. I served as staff coordinator under A. Philip Randolph and Bide Rustin, traveling to northern, midwestern, and upper southern cities, organizing coalitions to generate participation in the march and to raise funds to enable people to go to Washington, D.C. to join the march. 250,000 people, black and white, marched on the nation's capital, helping to create the political climate that led to the Magna Carta legislatively of the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The book also discusses the A. Philip Randolph Institute, an organization made up primarily of black trade unionists, acting as a bridge between the trade union movement and the civil rights movement, between organized labor and the black community. As a leader of the Institute, I traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, to work with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, union staff, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to generate community support for striking sanitation workers. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Memphis to lend his prestige and leadership to the campaign. I helped organize a march to City Hall in Memphis, led by Martin Luther King Jr. Youth participants in the march began to throw stones and rocks, breaking stone windows and looting. The police responded by tear gassing the march, and Martin Luther King Jr. turned the march back to its point of origin. Depressed, because this was the first time he had led a march in which the discipline had broken down. We, the staff, convinced him that we ought to go ahead with a second march, which he would lead, indicating that this was basically a labor struggle and that we would recruit union leaders and increase the labor presence to maintain the discipline of the march. King began leading the organizing of the march when he was assassinated. We continued the organization. The march took place as a memorial to Dr. King and in support of the striking sanitation workers. I oversaw voter participation drives that led to such noteworthy congressional figures being elected as Andrew Young and John Lewis of Georgia, Mike Espy and Benny Thompson of Mississippi, Barbara Jordan of Texas. I coordinated a statewide voter participation campaign in 1991 that resulted in the defeat of the Klansman David Duke in the Louisiana's governor's race that year. In 1992, I directed voter participation campaigns in Black communities in 8 states. The Black vote provided the winning margin in those states that was as decisive in the election of William Clinton to the presidency. We, through, by, and with, climbing the rough side of the mountain, carry forward the legacy of A. Philip Randolph, who resided here in Penn South the last 10 years of his life, the nation's greatest Black labor leader. The founder of the most historically significant union for Black workers, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, who served passengers who rode long-distance overnight trains, the father of the modern civil rights movement, and Bide Rustin, an original cooperator. A. Philip Randolph's most outstanding colleague, a civil rights leader in his own right, arrested over 20 times in the struggle for racial equality, a master strategist and tactician of the movement, continuing the struggle for racial equality and economic justice. I conclude by urging you to purchase our memoir. Thank you.
You heard the man.
Thank you, Norman. Can you hear me? Yes. Norman and Velma, thank you for asking me to read a short excerpt from the book. I feel really honored that you asked me to do it. And I'm going to read a brief excerpt from the prologue. What a time to be young, full of promise, and in love. It was 1960. The dawning of a new decade was beginning to illuminate our uneven path to racial equality. It was a journey of heart and conscience so many of us were making. Along the way, we were finding new purpose. We were unabashed. We simply wanted to change the world. And in our youthful hubris, we were convinced that the world would comply. The civil rights movement was on the march. We watched years earlier an unassuming Black seamstress say, with a rousing quiet dignity, "No more." We saw a young, little-known Baptist preacher in Montgomery, Alabama, step in to lead ordinary Black folks in a year-long boycott of the city's bus system. Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. had started a wave that would wipe away decades of dehumanizing practices and customs. In the midst of all that, we met in Chicago. One of us was a native of that Midwestern Oz for millions of colored masses who arrived there during the Great Migration. The other was born and raised in relative ease in Summit, New Jersey, and it was our commitment to activism that brought us together, sped us to the altar, and made us a team for the rest of our lives. No matter what we accomplished or failed to accomplish in the movement, we always had each other. We had such a bounce in our step, a glide in our stride that spoke of a renewed grace and confidence. There was fun, unguarded laughter, and a zest for the possible. And there was always a sense of mission, the serious business of belonging to a generation of Black people primed to transform everything that had come before it, to step up, speak out, and lift up in unparalleled numbers and in unprecedented ways. We were organized and organizers, and we were risk takers in risky times. But there was also something else. We were fulfilled. 63 years later, we are still no less fulfilled and committed to each other and the hard work still to be done. There's no discount, no bargain basement clearance sale on freedom and opportunity. Our story of the movement is a living story, one with roots reaching deep, far below the topsoil of generations that have reaped so many of its benefits. Our story of the movement is one that of course looks back, but it also looks forward, and it's populated with consequences and demands that are as contemporary as the moment you hear these words. Thank you. And thank you to Norman and Velma. Oh, and now, I almost forgot. Our next speaker is Velma Murphy Hill. Velma is a graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She was the leader of the Chicago Wade-In to integrate Rainbow Beach. She was Northeast Regional Field Secretary for CORE and an assistant to the president of the United Federation of Teachers that successfully organized 10,000 New York City paraprofessionals. That chapter has grown to include 28,000 paraprofessionals. She subsequently served as International Affairs and Civil Rights Director of the Service Employees International Union and Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers. It is my pleasure to introduce Velma Murphy Hill.
Hello. And I am happy to see you on this rainy night. You came out. I hope you were happy you came out. And I hope that you enjoy the book. I'm going to tell you about 2 episodes in my life which are unforgettable. The first is the organization and the desegregation of Rainbow Beach in Chicago. And the second is the organization of paraprofessionals in New York City. I don't know whether you know this, but in Chicago, the summers are hot. I mean, you walk out of the building and the heat comes off the sidewalks. It was one of those hot summers in 1960 when the whole world was turning upside down, and the change was coming over the country. In Africa, there were uh, in Africa there were moves against colonialism and for democracy. And even in Hungary, there was a revolution, but it ended. And in the South, in North Carolina, there were sit-ins. And you know, we all, everybody, looked at and listened to the sit-ins. And I guess I was about 19, 20 in 1960. And I was elected the president of the Chicago NAACP and Youth Council. And you know, young people, we decided we wanted to do integration, desegregation in Chicago. So there was a beach. Now, there was a beach in Chicago, and black people were not afraid of the beach, but they often got run off the beach, you know? And I think Mrs. Obama's relative got run off the beach in a bike. So we decided to go out and desegregate the beach. I'm not going to tell you the entire story, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. The NAACP was black and young, and I met Norman there at a meeting, and and he said the beach has to be desegregated by whites and blacks, and so I said, okay, we didn't know how whites and blacks would act, and he went to the University of Chicago, and he got about 15 young people, and he said, you want to integrate the beach? So we said, okay. And they said, okay. And you know, we went out on that beach, and I was really scared. You know, you read books, and you don't read about the real fear. The real fear of those who want to integrate. The real fear, the real courage. So Norman came and got me, and he in the car, and I said, ay, Norman, I'm scared. And but I can't act like I'm scared. And I said to myself, Velma, don't throw up. And I didn't. I walked out on that beach and I saw that integrated group of people, and my courage got really illuminated, you know? We went out on that beach, and there was a big wall of whites, men, and they were just staring at us. And one of them said, you're on the wrong beach, nigga. And you know, it was like a slap in the face. But we kept going. We got on the beach. We we spread our blankets on the beach. And then the beach got quiet. There were no kids on the beach. There were no women on the beach. And then these men jumped off the wall, and they started to come at us. They had chains, they had bricks, they had bats, and our backs were to Lake Michigan. So we had to go through that phalanx of men. And all of a sudden, rocks began to fall on us, bricks, and we marched into the, I guess it was like a house that you change clothes in. And I got hit in the head. I got about 17 stitches in the head, and oh, my white shirt was covered with blood. And they said, oh, Norman carried me off the beach. Now, I was a little smaller then, so he could carry me off the beach. And we went to the hospital, and we came out of the room, the examination room where I was hurt, and all of the blacks and all of the whites, we said we were scared, but we were going to come back to that beach again and again until it was desegregated. The one thing that I remember was that the next week we came back to the beach, and there were trade unionists, there were community people, there were religious people, there were over like 100 people who had coalesced, and they had supported us. That was wonderful. That was like the beginning of what we call coalition politics today, And I guess Norman and I got married. Had my head shaved off, and I don't know why Norman married me with my head shaved off. But anyway, we got married, and I got pregnant, and we lost a child. And I became paralyzed for 6 months. And I think I still have some signs of that paralysis today. But I know I lost a family, but I gained a family in the civil rights movement, in the labor movement, and real family that stayed with us until today. I don't know whether or not I have time to talk about the paraprofessional division, but I just want to say a little paragraph. Norman and I began to understand that economic justice was the same as racial equality. And we came to New York, joined CORE, and then I went to Harvard, and I got out of Harvard, and I went into schools, and I saw these Black and Hispanic women, and I said, who are they? And they said, paraprofessionals. And I said, what do they make? They said, $50 a week. No benefits, no vacations. It was just incredible. They took summers off without pay, and they had to apply for jobs in September. So I said, you know what? I got to organize these women. I said, I got to do that. And we did it. And today, yesterday, there was 10,000 paraprofessionals. Today, there are 28,000 paraprofessionals. And today, in 1960, there was $50 a week. Today, there are $49,000 a year. And they are fantastic. And I am so proud of every single teacher who supported paraprofessionals, every single paraprofessional. And, I'm also proud of granting them the way to become teachers by a career ladder program. And it is marvelous. And I want to tell you that there are a couple of chapters in the book that are devoted to paraprofessionals, and we see paraprofessionals who became teachers, who became principals, and who loved the union. And I love the union. And I love Penn South. And I just want to say that Penn South is a place where all kinds of movements started. The March on Washington started in Penn South. The desegregation started with me and Norman in Penn South. And I really want to thank the people in Penn South for welcoming us, for being our home, and for being the home to lots of civil rights leaders. And I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for sharing that. I know I speak for so many people in our community who are so honored that you live here and you've been willing to share your stories over the years. And I think one thing that's unique about this evening is that you've both not only are sharing your stories or beginning to share your stories with us, but that you wanted to take an opportunity to make yourselves available to people this evening to ask questions of the two of you. And so with that, I'd like to open up the floor to those people in this room who would like to ask both Norman and Velma any questions. Yes.
Usually always started. I'm just wondering in terms, you talked about doing voter organization in the Black communities. And I'm just wondering, I know that a lot of them have been gerrymandered practically out of the kind of representation they should have, definitely in Alabama for one place. I'm a little concerned about the kind of organization that's taking place in terms of mobilizing these communities to vote. Not that, Americans don't vote. Maybe 50% of us vote every year anyway. But to make it more in terms of, the communities that really need to vote in order to begin to get the kind of representation they need. So I wondered how involved you are, how connected you are to the people who are doing the work, and what the situation is now.
I'll begin. Recently, in Georgia, there were two Senate races that took place in 2020, and we gave support to two Van Opens affiliates, one in Savannah, the other in Macon, along with a major organizing drive that took place in Atlanta to turn out blacks, but it turned out not just blacks, but there was a changing demographic situation in which they were allies and some whites as well, that resulted in the election of the first black senator and the first Jewish senator from Georgia. You mentioned Alabama. The black population, voting population, is 27% of the state, yet only one congressional seat is occupied by a black representative. A state legislature drew a map which in fact diluted and split the black vote so that it was not possible for an additional seat to be occupied by a black representative. The Supreme Court, throughout the congressional map drawn by the state legislature, nevertheless, the state legislature went ahead and drew another map that was essentially the same until the Supreme Court again ruled. And finally, we have a situation in which there will now be an additional seat likely to be occupied by a black congressional representative. So that I would say that we have, in a number of states, voter suppression in which there are stringent ID requirements to register and vote, in which there are cutting back and reducing early voting hours and other measures to, in fact, restrict and make it difficult for blacks, other minorities, the elderly to vote. But I think that there is no substitute for the kind of grassroots, person-to-person mobilization that have taken place recently in a state like Georgia, that will take place in other states around the country. And we are challenged to, in fact, mount aggressive voter participation drives so that there is an effective march to the polls come 2024, when there will be a critical presidential election and in congressional races that may very well determine the future direction of this country politically for years to come. Velma may also want to comment.
Was that good enough? Well, there are two things that I want to say. I want to say that this is a very important period in the United States, probably one of the most important periods. We have the development of a white, well, it's true, a right-wing movement in the United States. And by the way, they're all over the country, all over the world, that is going on. And we need to get rid of the Trumpers. and reclaim and claim our democracy here. We're not perfect, but we are more perfect than most other countries, okay? And we need to develop coalitions based on the coalitions that existed before, and that is blacks and whites and Jews and Muslims and everybody, women, to get to reclaim our democracy. And I know you all agree with me. That's all.
Take another question?
Just one more question?
No, we have time for, we have
Okay.
like 7.
Okay, all right. Yes.
I just want to thank you and Norman for being here. I want to thank you for being pioneers in our community, in the Black community as well. I just want to thank you. It's very rare that we get to sit and talk with people that have been through the fight. It's funny because my grandma used to say, you have to climb up the rough side of the mountain, because if the rough side of the mountain was smooth, if the mountain was smooth, you slide back down. You need to have something to hold on to. So me holding on to people like you who've done this before. And it scares me because it seems like we're regressing instead of going forward, right? And I had the fortunate opportunity of being the president of one of the Democratic clubs, right, here in the city. And also now I'm the on the board, not the president, Amber, of Penn South Board. And all because of the movements, because of the work, because of the blood, sweat, and tears, literally, that you guys have done before that allow me to have this opportunity. I don't take it for granted. But my question is, I think many of the youth and many of the young people have become disillusioned with the way our society is and the way things are, and that they don't think that they have a voice. And how do you see the movement of, just the young people and just the raising of the voices to speak out and to stand firm? I know that when we have specific things, like if somebody gets killed, then we have a quick march and then it's over and then everybody goes back to their normal lives. But there are still things that are happening in the background. And how do we keep that momentum going to make these changes happen, as you have done, and you and Norman have done in the past? Thank you.
I think that there are movements, and they are important movements. Black Lives Matters is a very important movement. And, I don't agree with everything they do, right, but I agree with most things they do, okay? And I think that what we have to do is begin to talk more about coalition politics. We have to talk more and increase the understanding of Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph. Somehow they got lost in history. And A. Philip Randolph was the father of the civil rights movement. And he's never talked about. Bayard Rustin is barely talked about. And he, I think, is going to be the subject of a film that is coming up again. And I think that we have to, in our schools, understand that, civil rights movement is an important movement, should be taught. The American Federation of Teachers and the UFT is thinking about taking our book and making a lesson plan out of it. And I am definitely for that, not because I want to be famous. Not because I want to be famous, because I want history taught. And I want people who made history to be taught. And, you know, they try. They try in other cities. There are candidates running for, uh, there are candidates running for president who want to change the whole history. And I think we got to just fight against it. And I think that we've got to come together and fight against it. I am very happy to have all of you to talk about it, to talk about our need to come together. We need to have things like, well, who is it in North Carolina, Reverend Barbara? I mean, those moral Sundays. Yeah. Say it again?
Moral Mondays.
Moral Mondays. We need moral every days, but anyway. No, I think that we in New York should be ashamed of ourselves because we should be the head of the movement. We should be developing leadership in our young people. And we don't do enough of that. We do some, but we don't do enough. And the story goes on. I I wanted to leave you with a poem.
Oh, we've got, can we take some more questions?
Oh, yes, okay.
This beautiful history
yes.
is coming out. It's
Yes.
very, very moving.
Here and then one over here.
Okay.
Oh, over there and then here.
Sure. Just kidding. Okay, cool. Hi. It's so great to see you, Mr. and Mrs. Hill, meet you all. As someone who's a part of the younger generation, and this idea that I think instead of disillusioned, we might be overwhelmed by everything that is going on. And the question behind the how do you actually organize? So how would you suggest that we connect the avenues of older and younger generations? Because a lot of the hows behind the movement of like, how do you feed people? How do you pay for these things? How do you take your children out of school so they know to be a part of these movements? In an ideal world, what would that channel of communication look like? And if there was one how you could give the younger generation, what would you give them?
Norman, you want to take that?
Well, I think that it's important and essential to reach out and identify and involve youth themselves to speak to other youth and to define issues in a way that appeals to their self-interest.
I'm so sorry. I don't know how to turn it off.
Oh,
Whether it's fighting for minimum wage, whether it's in fact debt relief for those who've had to mortgage themselves for life just to get through college, but in such a way as to define issues in such a way that appeals to the direct self-interest of youth and indicate that there's the way in which they themselves can have an impact. A. Philip Randolph and Bide Rustin were committed to mass action, and to march was not dependent on how much money one had, or how much education you had. Now, what your economic and social status was, but your willingness to, in fact, take the initiative to challenge the unfair and unjust status quo in which you find themselves. And I think that it's important to find ways in which young people can in fact be engaged directly to press for change, change that in fact affects them directly and appeals to their self-interest.
We've got a question over here, unless you want to answer.
I think I'm talking too much.
Hi.
Hi.
Tina Thompson.
Yes.
I wanted to ask a couple about the fact that both y'all come from different backgrounds and y'all been together for 60 years, both fighting for civil rights and union labor rights. Y'all been together for almost 60 years, for more than 60 years. The love, how did y'all manage to stay together for so long while fighting two different battles on the same time?
Well, you know, I've been asked that question before, and by young people, by the way, and I've told them that first of all, you got to be careful who you pick as a partner. You got to be careful because if you pick the wrong person, then you'll have trouble. So you want to pick somebody whose values are similar to yours. You have to pick somebody who is going the same way you are going. And the movement was our child, okay? The movement was, we talked about the movement. We sought people out, like Bayard Rustin, like A. Philip Randolph. And we listened to them, but we also argue with them, you know? You know I argued with them. And we learned from them. And so that I don't know how we stayed together. You know, our love was very, very deep. And Norman is the kind of guy who is really quiet and who says, honey, let's sit down and talk about things. And I say, I want to live, you know. So we're not the same kind of people, but we're going in the same direction. And that's very important.
Now you tell me.
Hi, I'm Tiara, and I'm a resident of Penn South. And I've worked in the hospitals with kids who live in their beds, and for 20 years. And every time I enter a classroom or a hospital, there's a para there right next to the child. And it didn't occur to me until this moment tonight that there's somebody such as yourself that went through the trouble to care that much and put it together so that when I walk into the hospital, it's just automatic. I assume that there's going to be a para next to the child, and that's thanks to you. And thank you for opening my perspective. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Wow.
Any other questions? This is your opportunity. This is all right. I'm gonna just, Velma's gonna take a few minutes to read for us, and I'm gonna let her do the introductions.
Also, we're a team, and Norman wants to talk a little bit about the people we've come into contact with in the labor movement, in the civil rights movement. And then I will thank all the people, and there are many, who helped this book come to fruition. Okay?
I would like to share with you some of the leaders who gave our memoir statements of praise, endorsed it, we call them blurbs, and helped spur support and interest in the memoir. They are as follows. Liz Schuler,
Who is she?
she is the president, the first woman to be president of the AFL-CIO. Mary Kay Henry, president of the Service Employees Union of 2 million members. Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. Lee Saunders, president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Mark Muriel, president of the National Urban League. Reverend Arl Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and television commentator. Last but not least, Cleola Brown, who was scheduled to come tonight to bring greetings, but unfortunately, because of illness, could not be here. Senior Advisor for Strategic Partnership and Racial Justice, AFL-CIO, and President of the A. Philip Randolph Institute.
Okay, I have to I have to do this. You know, this book took I guess 5-6 years to write, and there were people who helped to bring this book into fruition. And I just want to mention a couple of names. Um, Ron Taylor, who is Norman's assistant, couldn't be here, but he was very, very helpful in the book. Sandy Byers, Sandy, she did fantastic work editing. She is a wonderful person, and the major editor, which is who died last year, was I'm sorry.
Michelle.
Wow. You know, I just blocked on his name.
Michelle Mary. Michelle
Marriott was incredible, and the book would not have come to fruition without him, by the way. Now, Gretchen Young is the publisher, and you know what? She saw our book and she said, "Boy, this should be read," and she took it under her wing, and we thank her very, very deeply. Now, the part of the proceeds of the book will go to an organization, and we selected the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, whose president is Maya Wiley. And she was the daughter of George Wiley, who was a civil rights activists in our time, by the way. I also want to thank Shartina. Shartina Thompson, she heard about our book. She said, I want to be in this family. She made it a point of doing her work to create a cover for the book. You all see it. And she worked very hard to help the book make a statement. Audrey Peterson. Audrey Peterson, who we have known for many, many years, was also, and by the way, and she had faith in our book. She wanted the book to come out. She needed the book to come out. And it came out. Now Louise Crawford, she was wonderful, a publicist, and she worked her behind off. And I have to tell you, although she couldn't be here, Jennifer Lyons, she was our agent and is our agent, and she couldn't be here, but she really worked hard to get the book out. And I have to tell you, my niece, Leslie, stand up, Leslie. She has been supportive of me. She wanted to move into Penn South. She has been cooking for us. She's been cleaning for us. But more than anything else, she is a wonderful hairstylist and makeup artist. Let me see, did I forget anybody? Okay. I have to say that I met Amber, and Amber was a child of child of Bayard Rustin's, and he mentored her, and we love her. And anything she wants from us, she can get.
How about a book?
Amber is the president of a board, but you know what? To be a good president, you got to have good members. And Charles, Mayor. Luana, the Penn South Social Committee, the Archives Committee, and I'm just so happy I live here. I am just so happy I live here. I also want to introduce a couple of more people, just a couple of more. Walter Nagle, who is the partner of Bayard Rustin and is trying to carry on his tradition. And he is here tonight, and I want to give him a hand. I just want to give a hand to Leroy Barr and Brendan. Brendan, stand up. Okay. I want to end with a poem that I learned a long time ago. It says, freedom. Freedom doesn't come like a bird on the wing. It doesn't come down like the summer rain. Freedom, freedom is a hard-won thing. You got to work for it. You got to fight for it, day and night for it. And every generation's got to win it again. Pass it on to your sister, mother. Pass it on. Pass it on. Norman? Okay.
I would like to end this evening by thanking the two of you, Norman and Velma, for sharing your extraordinary story with us, but more importantly, inspiring us, because with all the struggles that are happening in the world today, we need to hear from people like you who are striving to make the world better, not just identify what's wrong with it, but what we need to do to make it a better place. So thank you for doing that. It doesn't happen often enough. So to all of you, thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank PSSS, our board, Luana, Charles, who are here tonight for hosting this wonderful event. Please find the time, talk to your neighbors, spend a few minutes with us, purchase a book, and spend a few more minutes celebrating with us before you go back to the rain. Thank you.